Okay, so we are going to actually kick off a very interesting topic, which is actually starts this whole topic is actually titled aggregate incomes, which I think might kind of obscure the actual topic that we're looking at. I mean, it is very pointed because what we're talking about, what we're really curious about, are why are the rich rich? Why are some countries very rich and some countries very poor? That's a big question, right? I mean, you see it all around the world today. So how did this happen? How did we become rich in terms of a country? How did this develop? These are all the types of questions we're looking at. So aggregate incomes. Again, you think of incomes, you're going to probably think of, well, how much money did you make, right? But that's not again what we're thinking. We're thinking again of real stuff. So to make the point really clear, what if I said I'm going to pay you $2 a year? How are you going to feel? You're like, no way, Professor Kidder, am I working for $2 a year? But here's the kicker. What if a Ferrari cost 2 pennies? Now, how do you feel? See, so dollars is not, again, exactly what we're curious about. What we're curious about is the amount of real stuff that we can actually consume, that we can put in our mouth, right? So that's what we're talking again about real incomes. When you look at these two pictures, you can see that some students have computers and are at nice desks and in classrooms with chalkboards, and have a lot of equipments. And other students, being of a poor country, are sitting in the hallway, not having any of these things. So again, what's the difference? Look at it. It's the differences in the stuff that these different countries actually have. And so we want to have a measure of stuff, which again is GDP. And we're going to think about looking at GDP per capita. Per capita meaning you take all the stuff that's made and you divide it by the number of people or the population in a country, and you get GDP per capita. So that's going to be sort of our main metric. And so again, what I want you to think about is, first off, there's two things have to happen in order for you to get stuff to consume. Well, first off, you have to make the stuff, right? And then secondly, it has to be allocated. So really, what we're going to be thinking about is this is really going to be a look into, how do we make stuff? How do we make GDP? And what's that process driven by? So that's the primary concern, and that is what's going to sort of then determine how much stuff I can then eat or consume. So so we're going to look at the production process. Now, production is going to take different what they call factors of production. Factors of production. Well, to make stuff, you're going to need to have what? Some land. You need to have people or some labor, right? You need to have capital. Again, capital here, we're not talking about money. A lot of times people think we're talking about money. We're not. Capital here is going to be the factors in production that actually stick around after you're done. So if we make a pizza, you're going to have some flour, some other types of ingredients, some materials. That's a factor. You need some labor to actually roll the dough, and you need an oven to throw it in. Well, I think at the end of the day, all the material's gone. It's been made into pizzas and put out and sold. The labor goes home. It's gone. What sticks around? Well, the ovens, the buildings, the furnitures, okay, the machines, those stick around. Those are what we're going to call our capital. Okay. And you also need to have entrepreneurs who come up with ideas about how to organize all of these and find markets. That's also commonly considered a factor. Um, so, getting back to the question, why are the rich rich and the poor poor? Your initial thought might be, well, maybe some countries just have more land or are more abundant in labor or more abundant in capital. And actually, if you think that, you wouldn't be alone in that sort of approach. But what we're going to look at, what we're going to find, and I'll validate this, is that answer might be more appropriate if we were to look back historically, thousands of years or several hundred years and before in human history, but maybe less so today. And you'll understand that hopefully in just a few short minutes here. So, to understand first how production has evolved, we want to look over time. This is an interesting graph. It shows world per capita GDP for the last 10,000 years. Now, what do you notice? What do you notice? I hope you can see the obvious trend here. It's completely low and flat for pretty much all of human history. And then what we have is a spike. So, what's causing that spike? Do any of you know? It's actually a revolution that totally transformed the capacity of what can be produced by humanity and gave us a completely different potential for living that we never had before in all of our human history, going back to our earliest ancestors. Okay. That revolution, if you got it, was the Industrial Revolution. What was the Industrial Revolution? Well, the Industrial Revolution really began with the invention of steam power, or the steam engine. What does an engine do? A steam engine, it takes fuel, heats up water, and turns that into, powers a piston that turns that into rotary power that gets transferred by gears and belts to machines. And what you had was the creation of horsepower. Now I can turn coal and wood and water and sort of instantly have a sort of an army of horses that is horsepower that can actually drive my machines and push it forward. So it's not the people, before it was all the people that had to push and pull and to make everything actually happen. Now you have the creation of mechanical artificial horses to drive your economy forward. Horsepower, the engine. It actually started in textiles in England. 1600s started spreading through Europe and into the Americas and the United States. We really benefited specifically from that Industrial Revolution, having those close ties with England early on, having the revolution start there. And you had this explosion of production capacity. Now, one interesting thing to get back to the point, remember, before the Industrial Revolution, you would be very right to think that, if you had more sort of factors of production, raw factors like more labor, more land, okay, you'd be able to make more stuff. And this is a very nice graph. This graph is actually 2,000 years of economic history in one chart. On the x-axis, we have years from the birth of Christ all the way up to 2017. And on the y-axis, we have the share of GDP of the world, and each color is represented by a different country. So prior to the Industrial Revolution, remember, 1600s is when it really started kicking off. And what you see is that, prior to that, where was most of the population concentrated? Well, China and India. Who was making most of the stuff? Well, China and India had the biggest share of world GDP prior to the Industrial Revolution because they had more people, massive armies of people. You can make things like Great Walls. And if you've ever been to China, they've got these incredible, structures that you just think must have taken just an ungodly amount of labor. I mean, they actually dug lakes and made mountains out of the dirt and put castles and other. It's like, yeah, I can imagine digging that thing. My back hurts thinking about it. Okay, but 1600 Industrial Revolution, and you see a small country, United Kingdom, very small island country, just really start to take over shares, transferring into the U.S., leading to expansion of the industrialized nations, and then you also had things like world wars happening. So, and World War II specifically, all those Western sort of European countries just got bombed out, and so all their factories got bombed out, leaving the U.S. as the number one main manufacturing sort of site that was left intact. So that led to the 20th century sort of global economic dominance of the United States. And then we see another trend here too. We see that actually China's resurged in their share. And that resurgence actually began. So prior to 79, China was totally closed off. You couldn't really do anything in China. In 79, it was actually China opened up their doors in 2003-ish. I believe it was, they joined the WTO and started getting more access to world markets. Companies were flocking in there to just produce. And I want you to think, what happened? You had an economy that had, very low levels of technology, had evolved that way since their earliest ancestors. And now all of a sudden they're being injected with new knowledge, new know-how, new foreign technologies. Okay. They got injected. And so there was this explosive growth that happened in China. So they're growing. They were growing at 86% since 2010. To put that in perspective, the U.S. growth rate's typically about 2%. Okay, so and we could talk about how that's been a little stagnating lately, but the growth rate of 86% is just phenomenal, and you see that's why we have this just explosion in their shares. What was driving that? I hope the answer is clear now. What's been driving the distribution of this new revolution? Well, what's the revolution? It's technology, it's knowledge, it's know-how. Technology is what's been driving this. Knowledge transferring, knowledge share. And so that's really interesting. There's a lot we could talk about with this. This is one of my favorite topics in economics. Unfortunately, we're just not, I won't take a 1 hour. We could really dive into this because, trying to understand, how knowledge is transferred between countries, how knowledge, the barriers to those transfers, how can it be absorbed? Why was China so successful in absorbing foreign technology? Other countries weren't as successful. That was part of my research I was doing when I was in China from 2013 to 16 at the Research Institute for Global Value Chains. I was looking at their industrial policy and trying to study this, and I'll save you the rest, but it's one of the most fascinating topics to me. Getting back to it, looking at the whole distribution of global incomes, I want us to look at this World Bank chart. And you'll see that this is a map of the world with darker countries having higher levels of per capita GDP compared to lighter shaded countries. And looking at the distribution, I want you to look at how GDP per capita is geographically distributed across the world. And it should be very clear, North America, specifically United States and Canada, Western allies in Europe, and Western allies in the South Pacific being New Zealand and Australia. And you also have a couple of the growth miracles in China that happened. Sorry, not in China, in South Korea and Japan. Those are a little darker right there. South Korea and Japan became some growth miracles. And you also have some oil rich in the Saudi Arabia there. But I want you to look at how this geographic distribution has sort of evolved over time. And let's go back 80 years. Let's take a trip back in time, 80 years to the 1961. And what do you notice about the trends? Actually, the geographic distributions of per capita GDP, they're looking and trending. They're pretty much the same geographic distribution, unless a couple of South Korea and Japan were poorer than they are today by a shot. And it looks like we have Iceland. No, they're about the same. So, I thought they might have dropped a tick, but it looks like it's right about the same. The point is that per capita GDP really hasn't geographically changed substantially over the last 80 years. And yet technology has continued to explode. And we do this begs again the question, what are some of the barriers that cause technology not to transfer in some places and transfer a lot in other places? For example, recently in China, it's very well known. There's been a whole intellectual property or IP issues about producing in China, being that there's less IP protections, meaning that domestic Chinese companies have gained a reputation for stealing foreign technologies, copying them. That's what the U.S. trade war was actually all about, and U.S.-China trade war. And so, you have this issue here and a question about, it's kind of fascinating to me, the fact that they could steal technologies. They could absorb foreign technologies very efficiently. That's what I was actually studying. It was, what was driving the absorptive sort of capacities of China. And there's a lot of discussion there. A lot of discussion about the barriers to knowledge transfer, about all this stuff. It's one of the most fascinating topics to me in economics. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to stop it here. This is just an introduction, and that's it. So we'll see you on the next time.